Hello everybody and welcome back to Call of Duty Cold War. Today I'm going to be going over every attachment in Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War Zombies. Pretty much what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going over all the weapon stats and then I'm going to be able to go over all the attachments just so it's a bit easier and it's a bit more organized so that when I actually go over the attachments, it's not so confusing. It should make it a little bit easier for you guys. Then I'm going to be going over the attachments that will appear in the game that you don't put on yourself, because there are attachments that only appear in the game. When you customize it yourself, you can put on any attachment when you unlock them, which is not the case in game. And this is just more for the people who want to have that knowledge rather than just being over flooded with every single attachment. But for the people who did want all the attachments, then I will be going over all of those. So going over weapon stats, I'm basically just going to be going over how important each one is. I'm going to try to make this short and simple just so that we can move on, and then I can go over them a little bit more in depth when we go into the attachments. Starting at the very top, we have damage, probably one of the most important stats there are. In zombies, the zombie health is always increasing, so there is usually going to be a point where having more damage is going to be more beneficial. Also, the megaton exists, so having to take less shots at him to be able to take him down is really good, and usually you're going to be using more than one shot unless you're using something like a sniper. So keeping damage in mind, it is one of the most important stats, and I would highly recommend getting this one as high as you can. Next we have effective damage range. Now this one I actually have a test. I'm going to be showing that to you right now. I use the M60 with the longest effective damage range, which is the highest in the game. It's like 150 meters. And as you can be seeing from the gameplay, I cannot get anything over 50 damage. Just from a body shot being not upgraded at all, it's always going to do 50 damage, and I cannot get it to do anything but that. But we go over to the AK-74U, the one with the shortest damage range at 5.7 meters, which is terrible. Generally, with shorter range fully auto guns, they are going to be doing point blank damage. When the zombie is really close to you, you're going to be doing more damage to them. And then when it gets out of that range, then you're going to be doing your effective damage range damage. And after that, it's going to be doing way less damage. When I use this AK-74U, point blank damage and the effective damage range is almost the same. There's just a 0.7 meter difference where you're actually going to get effective damage. But after that 5.7 meters, it goes down quite a lot. It may not look like a lot, but I mean, once we start to get into the higher rounds where you have to take more shots to kill zombies, you're going to be going through ammo really fast, and zombies just generally are going to be harder to kill, which you never want. So for effective damage range as a stat, I'd say keep it around 15 to 20 meters. That's usually the soft spot that you want to have the zombies at. Any more than that is just kind of unrealistic. That point blank damage isn't going to really do anything if the effective damage range is like in the hundreds. So this is an important stat for just keeping it at a good amount, but don't prioritize this over anything. Next we have fire rate. Now there's not a whole lot of weapons that you can change with fire rate other than tactical rifles and sniper rifles, and in the cases of those you are always going to want to increase the fire rate in one way or another. So I'd highly recommend this one because it's going to give you more DPS. Next we have bullet velocity. I have a test. I'm going to put that on the screen right now. Here's the Krig 6 with its max bullet velocity in the game. And then here's the 1911 with the slowest bullet velocity in the game. Did you notice a difference? Because I didn't. Don't worry about this stat. It's only for reaction time, and you are not going to have to worry about reaction times in zombies. So this is our first of many junk stats. And when I say junk stats, I mean just if you see it on an attachment, just try your best to ignore it. Next we have armor damage. There isn't a number for this one, but I can say that it does work. There are attachments that are going to increase armor damage, and that's just pretty much to the armored zombies. It doesn't actually do anything to the megaton, I believe. This is basically going to make it so that you get armor off of zombies faster, which is going to be really nice just for that random chance that you're going to get an armored zombie and you need to get him out of the way. It would be really good. So I do recommend this one if you don't have anything better. The last one for firepower is melee quickness. You shouldn't want this. Don't worry about it too much though, because there's only one grip that in the game that is going to affect melee quickness, and it's for an SMG. And then we have speed. Now, the first two that we have are movement speed and sprinting move speed. These are always going to be useful because this is how you get away from the zombies faster, basically making it so that they don't get in range of you, so they don't hit you as much, so you don't die. So it is important to have good movement speed, but you can take a hit if you need to for these ones. As for each individual point of the movement speed versus sprinting move speed, it's up to personal preference whether which one you want to increase or the other one that you want to stay at a normal rate. But if you can get movement speed, I would definitely highly recommend it. As for shooting move speed, when you're shooting, you're going to be moving a little bit slower, which if you have a less powerful gun like an SMG, you're definitely going to want this because you're going to have to keep away from the zombies while simultaneously shooting at them. Whereas if you have something like an LMG, you can probably kill them before they get to you. But with that being said, having shooting move speed is never bad, and typically this one in particular is a good stat to increase. Next is sprint to fire time. I did a test with this one too, with the slowest Pellington that you can have and the fastest Hauer you can have. And with this, you can actually notice quite a big difference. The only problem is that this difference is not going to matter in zombies. The only way this would be useful is if you just running around the map and then there's a zombie that just pops up around the corner and you have to shoot him really quick. But in the time that it takes for that zombie to hit you is about always going to be more time than it takes you to just pull out your weapon and shoot him real quick. But even at that, you can just try to avoid the zombie and it works perfectly fine. So this one is another junk stat. Next we have aim walking move speed. Now at first I'm kind of iffy about this one because you should never just be aiming down sight in zombies, just like looking around, but this actually does increase the shooting move speed when you're aiming down sight as well. So shooting move speed and aim walking move speed do stack it in a way. And it's kind of the same scenario here. I have a test that you're seeing on screen right now where the LMG move speed is absolutely terrible. I am slower than a round one zombie. That is bad, and I'm not even shooting. Whereas you look at the fastest aim walking move speed with the MP5, it's pretty damn fast. But with zombies, there's an additional factor that you have to take into consideration, which is stamina up. And if you have the modifier for stamina up, then you're going to be aim walking move speed faster. And that made sense what I just said. And you're going to be moving even faster if you're moving backwards. With the LMG, it's still not the greatest, but I mean, there's a huge difference and you can definitely notice it. Whereas the SMG, you're probably moving faster than walking move speed, which is absolutely insane. But I mean, most of the time you're going to be shooting when you're aimed down sight. You should be doing that all the time. So aim walking move speed is not a super high priority, but it is good to have as a good stat. Next we have aim down sight time, and this is kind of in the middle of a road stat. You don't really need to have it too high because there isn't a whole lot of time where you need to react quickly to a zombie, aim down sight and shoot him real quick, but for the time that it takes to aim down sight where your movement speed is slightly less, it is useful to have this. So again, not super high priority, but it's not like you have a choice anyways, because one of the attachments we're going to be going over is it just increases this. Next section, we have accuracy. Now, there's the vertical recoil control and the horizontal recoil control, and you're going to mainly want to focus on vertical recoil control. As for what this actually does, I'm going to describe in a certain way. For each shot that you take, this number is going to decrease the kick by. So it's not necessarily this number you want to look at, but it's your fire rate of your gun that you're using at the time and the vertical recoil that you're getting. So basically what I'm saying is the more your fire rate, the less vertical recoil control number it should be. And I created a graph just to point the actual numbers that what your fire rate is and where you want your J to be at. I don't know what J stands for, but you know, whatever that is. So typically around 100 RPMs, it's okay to have your fire rate like around 500 J spot. Then around 500 RPMs for fire rate, you're going to be getting like 350 Js that you want to be at. And then around 900 RPMs, which is the fastest fire rate in the game, you're going to be wanting to have around 250. So what those numbers actually mean is how well you want to be able to control your gun at around a 20-meter range, which is typically where you're going to be shooting the zombies from. But even then, you're probably not going to be shooting them from that far away, so you can shift this graph wherever your range is going to be. But just for any fire rate from 1 to 500, the graph is going to be quickly declining, but as it goes on to more RPMs for fire rate, it's just going to be slowly declining as it goes on. So it's just a big curve. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're choosing which attachments to control vertical recoil control. Next, moving on to horizontal recoil control. It's not as complicated, I think. You don't need horizontal recoil control as much, but it is definitely still useful to have. Because if you're just shooting the Megaton and you're trying to get those headshots so you can kill them a bit quicker, you're going to be missing if this is too high, because there's no really zombies that are going to be at this height, so you're just going to be missing shots and wasting ammo. But if horizontal recoil control is just fine and you're probably not going to be shooting the Megaton anyways, you don't need to worry about this stat at all. But just talking about the recoil controls in general, you can get this to a point where it's very manageable, but it's not like you really need to, because there are things you can do in game to make it so that you don't miss as much. But even if you do miss, I mean, getting ammo again in Cold War is not too hard. So if recoil control is completely unmanageable, then you can increase this if you want to, but I mean, I wouldn't super high prioritize this. I'm going to be skipping centering speed because you can't actually control this, and this is an attachment video. So then we have idle sway control. Now on most guns you can't affect this, but on tactical rifles and sniper rifles again, you can. And this is idle sway control, meaning when you stand still, this is the sway that you have on when you're aiming down sight. So you should never be standing still in zombies in the first place, so this one is useless as well. Speaking of junk stats, flinch resistance. Now flinch is basically when you take damage, and it's basically like recoil except you're not shooting, but it's going to make your aim just go completely somewhere else where you don't want it to be. But in zombies, when you're taking damage, you're not going to be wanting to aim down sight and shooting at them. You're going to want to move because you will die shortly if you don't do that. But in the case where you still want to be shooting when you take damage, I mean, you're probably going to be hip firing, so flinch isn't really going to do anything anyways. So I mean, however, the next stat we're going to is hip fire accuracy, which I think is one of the most important stats to have in zombies, simply because if this is higher, you're going to be hitting your shots more consistently, making it so that the zombies will die quicker, and you won't have to suffer the movement speed penalties like for aim walking move speed and aim down sight time. You don't have to bother with any of that. You could just have good hip fire and then you're good from there. And the best part about this is you can increase your hip fire accuracy without even using a laser. And the way to do that is just with Deadshot. With the Deadshot multiplier, I highly recommend having it. Because as you can see, I'm using the best hip fire accuracy in the game, which is with the Milano. That is really accurate. You're going to be hitting pretty much anything at any range with that. Comparing this with the M82, which has the worst hip fire accuracy in the game with attachments, you are not going to be able to hit anything without Deadshot. Whereas with Deadshot, it suddenly becomes more manageable. And I don't know how, but I mean, this still isn't a good hip fire accuracy, but this is actually somewhat manageable. But basically, anytime you see the hip fire stat, you're going to want to increase that at any chance you can. Moving on to ammo, we have magazine ammo capacity, which you want the highest possible. This and reload quickness is arguable to have, but I just prefer magazine capacity because if you have to reload at all, that means you're going to probably have to fall back on the zombies if you're doing a camping strat. And if you need to reload and your reload speed isn't the best, you can just time your reloads the best you can, and you could probably get a reload off. And then at that point, you're going to have a lot of ammo capacity. But sometimes you don't even have to pick and choose. You can probably have ammo capacity and reload quickness at the same time. When you can increase magazine ammo capacity, I would do it to the highest potential it can be. But with reload quickness, I'm not saying it's a bad stat, and when you can increase this, I definitely would. Then next we have max starting ammo and ammo capacity. I'm not entirely sure what max starting ammo does. I think it's just a stat that changes in multiplayer, but in zombies I have not noticed a difference. So moving on to ammo capacity, this one is pretty good to have. It's really good to have just for surviving and not having to spend points on ammo. But the way Cold War is, you can spend points on ammo, making it not as useful to have the most ammo capacity. So if you have to decrease the amount of ammo capacity you have, it's okay, but you're probably going to be increasing your ammo capacity just from having more magazine ammo capacity, because that's how some of these attachments work. And then our last two, increased salvage drop rate and increased equipment drop rate. I'm skipping salvage drop rate for now because when I actually go over the attachments, it is going to be making a lot more sense. But for increased equipment drop rate, you want this as often as you can. There isn't a number for equipment drop rate, but I can say there are different attachments that do have a better effect, and you usually want those attachments more, because what equipment drop rate is going to do is not only increase the amount of grenades and stuff that drop, but also your armor. And if you get armor early on, that is huge. You're going to be not having to spend that green salvage just to get level 1 armor. And even in the later game, I mean, in like 20s and 30s, even the 50s, you're going to be getting more armor drops, so you don't have to keep on going back into the bunker to go and get more, risking your life, literally risking your life to go get more. So this stat can definitely be huge, so I would increase this at any chance you can. So that's it for the actual stats. Going into what you can actually get in game for attachments, we're starting off with optics, and for any weapon, I believe you can get Vision Tech ×2, the Cobra Red Dot, and the Quick Dot LED, which is consistent pretty much through every weapon. But there are some weapons that can still get the Mill Stop. You can get the Axial Arms ×3, and the Celix Hollow Scout. These all are complete personal preferences. Usually I would prefer the Mill Stop if I can get it. Cobra's Red Dot is pretty good as well, but for some longer range weapons, I still would not mind the ×2 and the ×3 scopes. But again, it's up to personal preference, but I really don't mind any of these. Now, putting the stats that we just learned to use, we have muzzles. Now, you're going to be able to get the muzzle brake, which is the first attachment, and the sound suppressor, or just the suppressor it's called sometimes. The muzzle brake is going to slightly increase your vertical recoil control, which on some guns is still good. You can see the test I'm doing here where I just use the XM4 without it and then I use it with it, and there's actually a noticeable difference. So it's not like it does nothing, but it can be very useful. Whereas the alternative is the suppressor, which has increased equipment drop rate, and like I said, you want that as much as you can get it, but it comes at a downside of effective damage range and bullet velocity. This goes for assault rifles and LMGs. On SMGs and pistols, you're going to be getting less effective damage range. And for snipers and tactical rifles, you're going to be getting less bullet velocity instead, and less effective damage range on shotguns as well. Usually these negatives aren't too bad, but on guns that already have a low effective damage range, you want to probably go for the muzzle brake instead, because you're probably going to be getting a higher fire rate and you're going to want to keep effective damage range. Either one of these two options is fine, but you can go for whatever you want in your game. Then we go on to barrels. This is probably our most complicated stat, just because you probably can't tell what you're going to be getting in game. There is a way to tell sometimes, but on some guns it's completely just so hard to recognize which barrel is which. And you can kind of go off the lengths of the barrel, but it's extremely hard to do so. So right now on screen, I'm just going through all the barrels that you can get for every single weapon, and it's just going to be going through as I talk about it. So typically the barrels that you're going to be getting in game are the first three, which is your extended, Cavalry Lancer, and Reinforced Heavy. Your first one, which is the extended, is going to increase your bullet velocity. You don't really need that unless you have shotguns, which is actually going to increase effective damage range, which in which case it is not a bad thing to have. As for the Cavalry Lancer, it is always going to increase armor damage. This is the one thing that increases armor damage, and like I said, if you have no better alternatives, this is definitely good to have. As for your Reinforced Heavy, it's going to have the two positives that are specific to the barrels, which is effective damage range and bullet velocity. This is for movement speed, and specifically for sprinting move speed and aim walking move speed. Sprinting move speed isn't too much of a downside. It's got like 4% usually, and aim walking move speed has 20%, which is not great, but if you need effective damage range, you can take it with this, but the movement speed is compensating for the bullet velocity as well, which I said to ignore. So it is very much less useful, so I probably would not recommend this in most scenarios. As for which barrels are different, you're going to be noticing that you're getting different kinds of barrels, and I'm going to go over them right now. For assault rifles, you can be getting the Cavalry Lancer, the Reinforced Heavy, or the Takedown, which the Takedown is going to increase your effective damage range for 5% sprinting move speed, which again, I do not recommend because usually assault rifles are already at a good effective damage range. SMGs are going to be the first three again. I would just encourage you to get the Reinforced Heavy because that is actually going to increase your effective damage range, and SMGs are already pretty nimble, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you don't like the movement speed debuff, you can always go for armor damage because it's still decently good. For tactical rifles, you can be getting the rapid fire, which is just going to increase your fire rate a little bit. You can get the strike team, which is going to also increase your fire rate, but also increase damage for effective damage range and idle sway control, which is definitely useful if effective damage range is good, which on typically all of them it is good except for the M16, which I would not recommend this one on. However, we also have the Task Force, which increases damage again, but also increases effective damage range and bullet velocity as well for vertical and horizontal recoil control, which on burst guns that is not too bad, so that is still pretty decent. But I would still recommend fire rate just because you get a bit more DPS like that. I don't think any of these options are bad options, and it's up to personal preference which one you want to choose for yourself. On LMGs, it's the same thing, except replace the fire rates for shooting move speed, which on LMG, shooting move speed is going to be really good for you. And the effective damage ranges are shortened on the division barrels, which is the replacement for the strike team barrels. So you're going to be getting shooting move speed and damage for this. As for the task force, it's actually going to be removing some ammo. You can decrease this just for the damage, but I don't really think it's worth it, and I would usually always go for the division barrels. As for snipers, you're going to be getting the first three again. The extended and the cavalry lancers do the same thing, but for the reinforced heavy, that is only on the Pellington, which increases fire rate and bullet velocity for aim walking, move speed, and idle sway. So it's definitely a decent one to have if you want it. But for the M82 and the Tundra, it's actually just going to increase fire rate, and that's it, which is definitely what you're going to want instead. For pistols, all the stats are pretty much identical to the SMGs, so you can relate it to that. And as for shotguns, like I said, the first one's going to increase effective damage range, which is good. But Reinforced Heavy is also going to do that while increasing fire rate for sprinting move speed and aim walking move speed again, which you're not really going to be aim walking at all with the shotgun. You're mostly going to be hip firing. And sprinting move speed is very small debuff, so this one is still really decent, but if you want armor damage, I do not blame you. Next, we have the body, which is typically going to be increasing your hip fire accuracy. And there's only one attachment that you possibly get if you get a laser, and that's the steady aim laser, which is typically going to be increasing your hip fire accuracy by like 15 or 20%. Not that much, but it definitely helps. Next, we have the underbarrel, which is just going to be the first one, which is foregrip, and that's going to increase horizontal recoil control by 15% or 20% depending on what gun it is. And for snipers, this is going to affect both horizontal and vertical recoil control. And next we have magazine, which, like I said, you want the most amount of ammo capacity possible, and there are two that increases your ammo capacity by the same amount, by the way, which is just going to be your first one, and then there's the third one that is basically a faster version of the first one. But the first one is going to be decreasing reload quickness, and Speed Mag 1 is going to be increasing reload quickness just for aim down sight time, which is definitely a good trade-off. But if for some reason, if you don't like having more mag size, I don't know why, but you can just increase reload quickness if you get the jungle style mag or the fast mag, whichever variant you have on your gun. Typically for this one, I would always go for the 40 round unless I really need aim down sight time, which typically on snipers you do, so I usually go for the lower mag one since you already get a hell of a lot of mag size with the snipers, except for the M82. That one is complete garbage. Next one, we have our handle, which is going to increase aim down sight time, and you can only get speed tape, which increases it by 10% unless you're using snipers, in which case it's just going to increase it by 5%, which is pitiful. And I don't want anybody going to the comments and telling me that they got a different handle for their gun, because I will guarantee you were using the MP5, Milano, the Type 63, the Hauer, or the Magnum, because on those ones in particular, it looks different and it's supposed to be serpent wrap, but instead for serpent wrap, you're going to be getting this unique handle instead. And our last one, but maybe possibly least, you can get either the 3 starting stocks, which is your tactical stock, wire stock, and duster stock. Tactical stock is going to be increasing your aim walking move speed by 20% for no downsides, which is nice. Wire stock is going to be increasing sprint to fire time, which is useless, so try not to get this one. And then there's the duster stock, which increases slide speed by 5%. Wow. You can see from the gameplay that you're seeing, these are the 2 slide speeds. I didn't notice a big difference, so I mean, it's up to you if you want to have that 1 in 1,000 chance that this is actually going to be useful when you're actually sliding around, because you do slide around a lot in zombies if you utilize it properly. But most of the time I would always go for tactical stocks just to get that aim walking move speed. As for how to tell you got this particular stock, you usually have to drop your weapon and physically look at the stock instead of just inspecting your gun, because it's really hard to tell. But just to know that you got the tactical stock, it's usually just the most solid stock that there is, because otherwise it's the wire stock and the duster stock, which is typically looking more lightweight. But there are some guns like the bullpup guns that just you can't tell because the stocks are already solid. So it just like adds a pad on there on random places, and it's just so hard to tell between them that well, I don't even care what I get for the stock anymore, because it's not like aim walking move speed does that much anyways. But if you really need it, then definitely go for the tactical stock. So that is all of the attachments that you can get in game. Now for putting on attachments just by itself, I'm going to be going over now. I'm not going to be going over optics because you can see all the optics. It's up to personal preference what you can get. For the muzzles though, at any chance you can get, I would get increased equipment drop rate, and this is the place you can do it. So you're going to want the flash guard, the SOCOM eliminator, or the agency suppressor. These attachment names vary if you are using certain guns like the AK-47 versus the XM4. Typically those wooden guns have different names, but they all do the same things pretty much. If you are using a gun that you don't want to decrease effective damage range, but you want increased fire or increased equipment drop rate instead of having recoil control, then you can go for flash guard, which doesn't put on any cons, but still increases equipment drop rate. I don't think it's by too much more, but it still does. But if you really need vertical recoil control, the infantry compensator is decent. It will remove horizontal recoil control as well, so if you're using something to kill the megaton with, I would not recommend this, and I would stick to the muzzle brake still. But I would still prefer the SOCOM eliminator over the infantry compensator, just because you get increased equipment drop rate with it, with even more vertical recoil control, but for less horizontal recoil control. But if you need that shooting move speed, which is just by 10%, I don't think that will hinder you too much. I would still recommend this one. But if you're using a gun that has good effective damage range already, then I would go for the agency suppressor, because this is going to increase vertical recoil control still, not by as much, but will also give you even more increased equipment drop rate, which I think this one is the one that gives you the most. So this still does depend on your situation, whether you should go for SOCOM eliminator or agency suppressor, but these are the ones I would stick to. But for very certain scenarios, the other 4 are still not too bad. As for which barrel you're going to go for assault rifle barrels, you can be getting strafe movement speed barrels, which is typically going to be in place for the first bullet velocity barrel. It's for 5%. I would not recommend this. It doesn't do too much. But if you are using the Krig 6, then you're actually going to be able to get the Countour barrel, which will give you 10% increased strafe speed for bullet velocity. So I mean, It's decent to have, but this one also has the CMB mil spec, which is specific to this one, and recently the new Groza assault rifle has this one as well. But this one only increases strafe speed by 8%, and it'll give you 6% damage still, which just for that damage I would recommend if you don't mind the less max starting ammo, which doesn't do anything. So you always want this. If you're using an SMG, typically you're going to want to get an effective damage range one, just so you can get that damage at longer ranges, just so that you can have a better all-around gun. But at the same time, the barrels are what is going to increase your damage, which the task force, which is the last barrel, is going to usually always increase damage. And this usually does decrease the amount of ammo you have, and sometimes it'll even decrease your recoil control, which it usually does. But if you can handle all these, damage is definitely good to have. Whereas if you can't really handle it and you don't really need the additional effective damage range, I would still go for the Cavalry Lancer just because it is a good stat to have. For tactical rifles, for the barrels, I would always recommend having more damage and fire rate. It's just always going to be good. For LMGs, I would still recommend that division barrel just for putting on compared to anything. For snipers, you want the best advantage that you can have. Usually having more damage is nice, but for snipers, I don't think it's too much of a priority. Instead, I would more try to prioritize fire rate. On the Tundra, you're going to want to go for the hammer forged one because that is going to increase your fire rate by 30%, which is epic. But on the M82 and the Pellington, you're going to be getting strafe speed, which is terrible. But on the M82 as well, you might even want damage, so that one is not too bad of one to have on there. For pistols, I would go for the Cavalry Lancer just because it has armor damage, or the Task Force because it gives you more general damage, but it'll decrease a lot of stats, which is not great just for that little damage increase, but it still could be pretty good. As for shotguns, the Task Force one actually gives you a huge damage increase for less effective damage range, which is already not great for effective damage range. You might even want to put on one of the other ones, but I wouldn't even try too much for the shotguns because there's not much you can do with the shotguns to increase its damage range. So I would pretty much always go for the damage one just because it's just a huge amount that you're going to be getting so much value out of. Next we have the body. Now with this, I was saying that you want as much hipfire accuracy as possible, and this is the place you're going to be doing it for. And it's going to give you less ADS time, which is a-okay because the ADS time decreases aren't even that much. So going for the 5 milliwatt lasers is really good. But this is also the place where you're going to be able to get increased salvage drop rate. I have done tests on each one of these attachments to see how much salvage you actually get for each one of these attachments, and I ran 3 games going to round 20, seeing how many salvages I got. So what I ended up getting is, with nothing, I got 6,100 average green salvage and 660 blue salvage. Then for the mounted flashlight, which is your first one, I got 6,100 again with 700 blue salvage. For the Tiger Team spotlight, I got 6,800 and 750. And then for the Ember sighting point, it's back with a little bit less with 6,600 and then 700 again for blue salvage. And then as you can see from these stats, it does actually make a difference what these do. But as for how much, I wouldn't even really pay too much attention to it because it'll probably just take you around just to get to the next level of increased salvage drop rate attachment, whatever that is. The Tiger Team is obviously the best, and with nothing, it does have the 660 average. But the weird thing is, on my third game for when I was doing nothing, I got 520 blue salvage. Otherwise, I got 750 and 710, which that one stat completely skewed that completely, and it didn't even make too much of a difference, and I don't know why that happened. I was using the Tundra for my starting weapon on that game, so I feel like that might have had a difference with it. But the weird thing is that I had more green salvage than the other 2 games in that, and you'd think I'd have more blue salvage, but I didn't. So I'm a little confused there, but I thought that was an interesting stat, so I'd share it anyways. So these do have a difference on which one you use, the Tiger Team obviously being the best, which if you have a strategy with just like buying score streaks and using them over and over again, and you need as much salvage as you can, then I mean go for the Tiger Team. But I would still highly recommend hip firing because it is one of the best stats that you can have. There's also the target designator, which has more revealed distance, which does nothing in zombies. So don't use this ever unless you have an addiction to using useless attachments for some reason. Usually I would always put the 5 milliwatt laser on, but if you did want to use the Ember sighting point, which is the last one that you will get less hipfire accuracy, but you will actually get increased salvage drop rate with this one, but it'll give you even less aim down sight time and sprint to fire time, which I said to ignore, so ignore that one. So it's up for what you're going for in your game for which one you want of these you want to use, but usually I would use 5 milliwatt laser. For the underbarrels, I did a bunch of comparisons to see how much move speed you actually get with these, and there's the Infiltrator grip, the Patrol grip, the Bruiser grip, and you will get less movement speed with the SFOD speed grip, and the other ones just increase your horizontal recoil control for the most part, but it can increase your vertical recoil control as well. If your vertical and horizontal recoil control is already pretty good, I would say definitely go for the movement speed ones. As for which one you actually want to use, again, it's up to personal preference. The Infiltrator grip is going to increase movement speed, shooting move speed, and aim walking move speed by 5%. Not a whole lot, but I mean, it's still a little bit. But if you prefer sprinting move speed over that, you can get that by 6% increase. But if you can't decide, then you can go for the 3% on all of those just with the Bruiser grip. However, you can get a 10% sprinting move speed increase with 15 horizontal recoil control on average if you use the SFOD speed grip, but it'll give you -6% on move speed, shooting move speed, and aim walking move speed. I don't think this is too worth just because sprinting move speed isn't going to do a whole lot and it's just going to take away from move speed, so it's not even going to matter anyways. And you don't even get that much horizontal recoil control anyways. And you can just get that if you have the field agent grip, which will increase vertical recoil control and only decrease shooting move speed, which on some guns is absolutely terrible to not have because it does it by a pretty big margin. But if you need the recoil control, then I would definitely go for this one. If you need movement speed over that, but you still need recoil control, the foregrip, the first grip that you have, is not too bad either. Otherwise, it's up to personal preference which movement speed one you want. For magazine, like I said, you always want the biggest mag size you can get, which is usually going to be the last one and the fourth one. These both depend on if you want to have more reload quickness over aim down sight time or aim down sight time over reload quickness. And I would usually go for the last one. It's weird because sometimes the last one decreases aim down sight time by less than your fourth mag in this category, and it still increases reload quickness. So, I mean, you can go for that, and that's probably the best option you can do. But there's the specific scenarios where you're using a sniper and you want aim down sight time, so you'll use a worse mag just so you can get that aim down sight time, which is perfectly okay. But most of the time, or all the time, I'm going to choose that last magazine because it's really nice. As for the handle, it's going to be constantly increasing aim down sight speed as you go. The only two that don't do this is the drop shot wrap and the field tape, which increases your flinch resistance, which is terrible again. And there's an additional stat on the drop shot wrap that is aim while going prone. And you should never be going prone in zombies unless you're looking at attachments on your weapons, if you're goofing around with the homies, or under the flogger, or under the garage door in transit, which those aren't on Cold War, so you should probably not use this. However, whichever increase that you have to aim down sight time is that you have at the time is really good, and it'll only decrease sprint to fire time, which again, that's useless as well. So you're pretty much just getting aim down sight time across the board, unless you have the last one, which is the airborne elastic wrap, or whatever the variant is called for the AK category of guns. You're going to be getting all aim down sight move speed, the highest amount over any of them. You're going to be getting flinch resistance, aim while going prone, which both of those you don't really need. You're getting less sprint to fire time again, but you're getting less shooting move speed. And this is going to be by just a little bit, so you really don't have to worry about it too much. But that is a huge increase to aim down sight time, being 30%. Unless you're using a sniper, which it is 12%. As for the stocks, after you get the first 3 stocks, you're actually going to be getting the next 3, which decreases hip fire accuracy, which is one of the most important stats. So I probably would not recommend this, especially the last one, which gives you a negative 30% hip fire accuracy for less aim walking move speeds in some scenarios than the one that gives you 15% less hip fire accuracy. The 4th stock and the last stock give you sprint to fire time, which you don't want anyways, but the 5th stock is actually going to be able to give you 5% average shooting move speed, which I mean is decent, and it also gives you a lot more aim walking move speed, which is great. So if you can take a hit to hip fire accuracy, maybe you want this one, but still I would recommend the tactical stock pretty much in every scenario. And that just about does it. I spent a damn more than an hour making this. So this took a long time. This is why I haven't been getting videos out for any of you who are subscribed. If you're not subscribed, do that because I like doing stuff like this just for fun. I'm not looking for views or anything. I'm just doing the stuff because I think it helps. There's an additional tip I have on this, which if you're going for leveling up weapons, you can actually go into your switching your class and you can actually press triangle or whatever platform you're on to edit your class, and you can actually see the attachments that you unlock and you can see their progression of leveling up one of your weapons, which is great. And I think they should definitely evolve on this, where you can actually look at your camos that you're getting instead of just tracking one and then just having it on the screen. Why would you do that? I heard that recommendation. This is definitely something that's really nice, and it's not even an intentional feature, which is great. So yeah, I hope this video was useful. If you found it useful or you just like the video, like the video. If you like my other videos, make sure to subscribe. Other than that, I'll see you all later, and bye.